Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Greetings of peace from PyeongChang. Welcome to PyeongChang Peace Forum 2021. This is a session about Global Civic Agenda on Peace and SDG 2021. This is one of many parallel sessions during PPF 21 to discuss and also introduce Global Civic Agenda on Peace and SDG. My name is Anselmo Lee. I'm a regional coordinator of APSD, Asia Civil Society Partnership for Sustainable Development, which is a regional partner of A4SD, Action for Sustainable Development. So I'm happy to be here again. This is the third PyeongChang Peace Forum. I guess some of you attended a PyeongChang Peace Forum. Let me check. How many of you were in PyeongChang before? Can you show all of them in the screen? How many of you were in PyeongChang? I cannot see you in the screen. Okay. Nobody? I don't see any hands up. How come? Ricardo was here last year. Ricardo was the only one. So I really hope all of you will come to PyeongChang next year. Oh, Ricardo now. Ricardo, you are the only one who was in PyeongChang before, you know. So we went to last year, the DMZ, demilitarized zone, to see North Korea. We could not cross the DMZ. I really hope you can come next year so we can discuss further. And also, hopefully we can visit North Korea, provided that this is a substantive progress in peace negotiation or denuclearization negotiation, you know. All right. So this PyeongChang Peace Forum, since many of you are first time, PyeongChang Peace Forum is co-organized by 3 organizations. There's a Gangwon Province and Municipality of PyeongChang, and also KOICA, Korea International Cooperation Agency, and hosted by 2018 PyeongChang Memorial Foundation. 2018, as you can guess, is a year of PyeongChang Olympic. We call PyeongChang Peace Olympic, which was a turning point from hostile confrontation to peaceful dialogue around the nuclear issue in Korean Peninsula. That's why, as one of the legacy projects of PyeongChang Peace Olympic, this PyeongChang Memorial Foundation was created to carry out various projects, including this PyeongChang Peace Forum. And this is also organized in partnership with the 5 government ministries: Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Unification, and Ministry of Gender Equality and Family, and Ministry of Culture, and Ministry of Environment. As you can see, there are many issues being addressed under this PyeongChang Peace Forum. That's why many ministries, they are also involved. Also, they are very much interested in this topic we are discussing. Some of the outcomes of our sessions will be presented to the Korean government and also other relevant bodies and institutions. Okay, this session, and also I want to show this is a PyeongChang Message for Peace 2020, which is an outcome document of the civil society session, where we want to really we wanted to highlight the linkage between peace and SDG. That's a main theme of this PyeongChang session. So this session is go deeper, elaboration of some of the agenda articulated in the last year. So we are going to deeper in terms of action agenda, the more action-oriented discussion today. So we did this short introduction. Let me invite one by one. We have 7 speakers. Let me explain a little bit about structure of this 7 topic. Obviously, number 1 is pandemic, coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic. That's the first topic. And the second topic is global campaign and disarmament campaign. You know, so today, there are a lot of discussion about divestment. That means how to get more money to support the SDG or COVID-19 recovery from nuclear, or the military budget. There was a common issue discussed here. So we have one presentation about specific campaign, disarmament campaign. This is number 2. Number 3, as you know, we have a G20 Summit. G20 most industrialized or most economically powerful countries, but unfortunately, they are more part of problem rather than solution. So this is a very important challenge for us. So how to engage with the G20 to make sure that they have a collective global accountability, to the people of the global citizen. That's why this year G20 will be hosted by Italy. We have a civil society group C20. So there will be a presentation about G20. Then obviously globally, we have seen the shrinking civic space almost everywhere in the world, So Civicus has been monitoring this report. So we will get a report from Civicus about where we are in terms of civic space. Then we have a concrete action. So we have a global week of action by the Action for Sustainable Development. So we will discuss how we can mobilize civil society and the citizens to tackle some of the global issues. And the last two is so very interesting. Last two, as you may know, last year was the 75th anniversary of UN. So UN General Assembly adopted special declaration on 75th anniversary of UN, and also UN Secretary General is supposed to present action plan, follow-up action plan in this September General Assembly. And there are a lot of discussion going on. So we introduce where we are now in terms of making follow-up plan. And also that is about UN Foundation. So UN Foundation is heavily involved in this one. And also the Coalition for UN We Need. This is a new name. The last year name was UN 2020. So you can see the structure of this agenda. First, the upcoming, the current issue, which is coronavirus, and then militarization or disarmament campaign, and G20, and civic space, then global civic action around the SDG, including also climate, then the global governance issue, UN reform, and then UN 75th anniversary declaration follow-up. It's a very heavy agenda, but it's all interrelated. So idea was, this has been the plan and the different ways, but these are all interconnected. So we want to bring this agenda together so that we understand common challenges and also to find a way to support different initiatives. So eventually we can achieve our common goal, which is more peaceful, just, inclusive societies. Okay, so without further ado, the first speaker, let me introduce Gagea. So you can introduce yourself in your organization when you make a presentation. So Gagea, you have now 10 minutes. All right, are you ready, Gagea?
Yeah, just a second, I'll share.
Okay, so you are speaking from India, right? Which part of India are you speaking now?
I'm from Hyderabad, but
Hyderabad,
right
okay.
now I'm in Delhi. Yeah.
Okay, good.
So,
please.
Thank you so much for inviting and also having this discussion. My name is Garga. I'm a medical doctor with a public health background. I would be, and I belong to an activist group known as the People's Health Movement, which was formed around 20 years back. I wouldn't go much deeper into it. I would really request you to go through it, but we are more towards, looking at health as a human right and also universal health care with the backdrop, in the backdrop of primary health care, which was in the 1970s, the World Health Organization came out with comprehensive primary health care in the Alma-Ata Declaration. So I'll come from this background, but my talk today would mostly be about the intersection between what we are learning from the COVID pandemic and what it means for the global governance of health, and in particular, restricting myself to the World Health Organization. So when we talk about pandemic, quite a lot of, you would have seen in so many of your WhatsApp groups or, on so many of your social media, in the starting, like World Health Organization is an organization which is quite complacent. It is kind of has not been doing work as much as it should have been doing, and so on. And many people then started asking, what is actually WHO? What is it actually supposed to do? People in the governance and public health spheres knew it, but many did not know. So I'll kind of start there. So the WHO was formed in 1948 and with a mandate to coordinate global health and the systems and help countries achieve the highest level of health attainable. And in particular, if you want to say in context of COVID-19, it could be to act as a directing and coordinating authority on international health. The reason for this is from the 1700s when we have seen, right from plagues, right from many sanitary issues and so on, and cholera and so on, there were many sanitary conventions, and through that, over a period of time, that WHO developed. And it actually is for a global response to uh, public health issues. And WHO plays a vital role in global health where member states are given an equal voice in its normative and standard setting work. WHO is a science and evidence based organization with a focus on public health. And when we say member states, a rich country like South Korea or Japan and a LDC like Nepal and Bangladesh have a same say in this organization. Let's say, I know we do accept that sometimes there is a different, the weightage they bring is different, but they have the same say, and a country has a single vote, or a country has, an opinion and so on, which isn't like that in. So this is about the UN, like every UN structure, WHO is also. So what was it that World Health Organization actually did during COVID-19? Many would ask. It was actually maintaining the international health regulations, which basically talks about the travel, also talks about imposing what is known as declaring a disease as public health emergency of international concern, and let's say sharing of viruses, one of the most important activity for anything, right from diagnostic kits to everything, and so on, to help countries in the with the science a part of it, and also helping countries about how do they deal with it. Are you supposed to wear mask, are you supposed to wear PPE kits, what is the treatment, what are the protocols, and so on. So just some examples is coordination of research and development like virus sharing, helping countries prepare and respond, technical assistance like the medical part, the public health part, and so on, coordinating global response, which is international health regulations and so on, and health communication, as we have been seeing. And as you also know, in the past few months, the World Health Organization, beyond World Health Organization, also gives comments and also makes suggestions. For example, the latest has been that there has been a proposal by India and South Africa that there should be waiver of intellectual property in the World Trade Organization, which is supported by almost all the southern countries and all the Asian countries. We haven't heard from South Korea. I hope that we will be hearing from them soon. Just to say, there have been limitations with COVID, and these limitations actually, do they come from WHO as an organization, or because the disease was new for everyone, is also something we need to really think about. There have been lots of rumors, lots of anger and frustration, and also victimizing a country or two because the origin of virus. We kind of have been able to deal with all these very well in the past 1 year. But what was the reality of the global cooperation and COVID response was, it also showed the ugly side of the world, that one, our public health systems were not adequately strong, and many countries were actually doing, as much as the virus were the harmful, or I would say very harsh, was also the response towards the COVID pandemic. For example, in India, so many migrants actually died walking from their houses because of abrupt lockdowns. In Philippines, you might be remembering how Duterte was saying that, we need to shoot people dead if they are roaming around defying the curfew. And in many of the places, non-COVID services of health were shut down. And health workers, for example, many of them were getting infected. For example, here on my screen is a protest in the middle of the pandemic by nurses that they want PPE kits. This also focuses on one thing, that health is something that is the responsibility of the government, and it needs to be provided by the government also, because we could see many people were not accessing healthcare because they could not afford it. So these last 20, 30 years of privatization of healthcare, the liberalization has taken a toll on our health systems. This is at the country level, but globally also there have been quite many issues. We could actually see that some of the best and most powerful countries in the best in the sense, in their own sense, and most powerful countries actually were failing in doing the basic minimal public health measures, and blaming and putting the blame away from the country's lack of health systems and public health systems. They were kind of pushing it on the World Health Organization and so on. Luckily, there has been a moral victory there that the new Biden administration brought US back into the World Health Organization. I mean, they were supposed to leave in June or July. That was one. But you'd also see many global problems, like, what was happening in Palestine, what was happening in countries that were under embargo, like Iran, Venezuela, and so on. So countries were actually going through quite some time, and we were as disorganized. So all these years of global solidarity, global coordination and cooperation kind of, we could see the harsh reality of it, and it was making it way more necessary that actually the rich countries and the poor countries actually work in very different ways. For example, I'm going into my next slide, where in the middle of the pandemic, US was hijacking. I'm not making it up. US was actually hijacking mass shipments in rush for coronavirus protection. Imagine. So if it is a free-for-all world without any United Nations organizations, or without, let's say in the context of COVID, without World Health Organization, even with the presence of them, we are kind of having these issues. We've had serious issues around patents. 3M, which was manufacturing N95, was not releasing patents. Many people were dying because they did not have enough PPE, N95 masks and so protective gear. African countries were struggling in getting reagents for doing the basic testing that were needed for COVID in the start. So this was 8 months back. But what is the situation today is, on my screen is a map where you see some countries are dark green, some countries are light green, and the others are brown and red. So this is the varying level of, the understanding or the estimation of when the population that needs to be vaccinated will be vaccinated, which is health workers, elderly, and so on. And you would see that the poorer and the LDC countries and those countries which don't have any manufacturing actually are suffering a lot. And in fact, yesterday, I was listening to the opening ceremony, and Celtrion's CEO was speaking, and he was saying about how South Korea was increasing their production facilities, but also was kind of noting that making is one part, but making them accessible for everything is another issue. So what we see is an unequal world where each country, despite the presence of United Nations, despite the presence of WHO, we have seen very, I would say prehistoric or barbaric conditions, which actually bring out the truth of the inequalities which we are in. And that I'm also saying, not at the cost of saying that UN and WHO are not necessary, but saying that it's way more necessary that we invest in these systems. And just to give you an idea, when someone talks about the vaccine, this is the whole much touted Act Accelerator Global Response to COVID, which was a multi-stakeholder platform. Unlike WHO, which is a multilateral member state platform, we here have a multi-stakeholder platform where basically when I mean United Nations, I mean WHO here, The WHO is just there for product allocation and basic, secretarial work, but most of the actual work was happening in private this philanthropy-led, private-led forums like CEPI, FIND, Gavi, United, and Global Fund. So what has been happening is WHO has been marginalized in the response towards COVID. And what you see right now, whenever anyone talks about the lack of, the inequalities or inequities in vaccination is mainly because of this, that the world countries were successfully taking out the response, taking out the development of the vaccines, the diagnostics, and so on outside the UN systems or outside the WHO systems, and we see a very private sector led one, which has actually failed to respond to. I mean, even Europe is in shambles right now when we talk about vaccination. I'll just quickly go to my.
Kage, you have only
slide.
2 minutes left. You need to wind up. Yeah, okay.
Yes. And finally, winding up is why are we actually in this situation is because WHO has been quite weak in the past many years. This has been weak due to multiple reasons because many countries also do not believe in the necessity for someone to do global governance of health. For example, in the 80s, the United States were very angry that essential medicines list was brought on. The baby milk marketing code was brought in, and so on. So, over a period of time, the like any United Nations organization, WHO also started losing funding. And you can see here, whoever is the Director General, let it be Margaret Chan or Tedros, have been talking continuously about the lack of funding for the organization. And you will see here is around 5 million, it's just around $5 billion is the budget of the World Health Organization. And you will see that it's been quite stagnant from quite some time. From the last 12 years, from the time of the recession, it's kind of around the same and not even growing according to the inflation. And $5 billion is less than the marketing or global advertising costs of most of the pharma giants, just to give you how small that is. And it's most of the funding is also tied. And here I'm just giving you an idea. What you see in blue is actually untied funding, and what you see in brown is tied funding. So most of the funds that the World Health Organization gets, is actually tied funding, and they don't have any they don't have any autonomy in how they spend it, how they use it, and how they help countries. So the basic problem has also been that countries have not been funding, and the funds they give are tied. And finally is, over a period of time, you see that the World Health Organization has started also depending a lot on private sector funding, and this predominantly comes from Gates and multiple organizations, and this has a real big problem for both the public health, because this also, not just Gates, most of the private sector organizations that you see here, once they start funding, the private sector slowly starts creeping into the policies, slowly starts affecting the public health standardizations, the standard setting norms, and so on. And even the responses, just like what you see in COVID-19. So here is a map. What you see is red is the member states, which are the countries, and what you see, the others are mostly, the green, the orange, the blue, purple are mostly private sector and outside funds.
Okay.
So there is a
Kage, I think you need to really wrap up.
I'm just closing it. And finally, I'll kind of end with this. The WHO, like any other UN entity, has been a victim of the shift in funding patterns over years. An organization struggling for finances is more likely to accept or cooperate with a variety of approaches that bring or promise resolution and further fragment programming decision making. This stands for WHO Foundation, which is being made, the BMGF, and so on. Thank you so much. And I'll just make, that would be sticking to the time. That would be.
Okay, thank you, Kagea. So although time was very short, I think you made a very important point, the inequality, vaccine inequality in terms of accessibility and then the global governance in health sector, especially WHO, and also financial independence, corporate capture issues. I think these are three key challenges among many others to our further discussion. Let's go to the next one. Sanchez Ochoa, you have also 10 minutes, please.
Okay. Well, first of all, I also want to thank you, the entire team of the PyeongChang Peace Forum, Anselmo, Irene, and everyone else who made this possible. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm going to share my presentation. So I'm going to speak about the Global Campaign on Military Spending, which is an IPB initiative. I'm an officer in Barcelona in the IPB, in the International Peace Bureau office there, and together with Centre de las of Peace Studies, we coordinate the campaign on military spending. Our campaign tries to bring attention to the massive amount of money that countries around the world spend on the military, and to raise awareness on what this means for our security, and also try to present alternatives to this spending. So our community intends to impact the discourse level and affect the decision making, so that budgets around the world do not dedicate so much resources to the military, and instead they shift that money towards human and environmental needs. Our campaign is going to make 10 years now. It started in 2011, and the main period of action is the GCOMS, the Global Days of Action on Military Spending, which will happen this year between April and May. I will talk about that later, but just for you to see where we're focusing, we see this wheel of the military economy and the wheel of actors and events that lead to war. We're focusing on military spending, which we could say is the beginning of this cycle, because it's the money that is going to pay for weapons, and it's the taxpayers' money that is going to initiate this process. So we're focusing on this one, but of course it's all interconnected, and the peace movement works in all of these parts. And some people will focus on the arms trade, some people will focus on the military industry, some on the culture that is enabling and that is making this happen, also on the consequences of war, on the consequences of the use of these weapons. But we've decided to focus on this aspect of the cycle, because we consider that if we can convince governments into spend less money on military power, war and conflict are less feasible, and we can give peace a chance. So this is a map of the 30 countries that spend the most in their military. This is figures for 2018. We have figures for 2019, which are slightly higher. The total military spending that year was 1.82 trillion. And in 2020, we will see it soon. In April, we will find out the new data from Civic, from the Stockholm Peace Research Institute. But we can already advance that it's going to be similar to this. The United States has more than a third of what we spend globally in the military spending, and it's followed by China. And between the United States and the 7 following countries, they spend 2/3 of the world's military spending. And you can see South Korea in there is for 43 million. Sorry, 43 billion. 43.8 was for 2019. And you can see how this competition and how this military power projection takes shape. So why do we question military spending? Well, first of all, we think that if we follow the history lessons, if we see what happened before when countries were arms raising, when this military buildup happened, it can only lead to one thing. It can only lead to war. It will not lead to further security. This idea of deterrence, outperforming each other in military power, cannot lead to peace. Contrary to the general doctrine, no, they tell us that we need a military, or that we need military power to protect ourselves, but this homeland national security approach is completely misguided. And it also addresses threats that cannot be fixed by the military. For example, when we see their doctrines, they are focusing on terrorism. For example, the war on terror, which cannot be dealt with the military, and we have 20 years of lessons learned from that. Other issues like organized crime, cyber attacks cannot be dealt with the military. And then, of course, there are three key issues that are getting a military response that should never get it, like migration, like climate change, and the pandemic. So these threats that the military identify and that they use to justify their existence cannot be and should not be dealt like that. Another reason for us to question military spending is the opportunity cost. Is this dilemma of guns or butter, and we need to keep in mind that each dollar is spent in the military is not spent in other aspects. For example, the welfare state, which is severely underfunded in many places. And we believe that if we would manage to shift the money from military to social or environmental issues, it will create a huge peace dividend, and the economy will perform much better. Another reason for us to question it is because military spending causes, exacerbates, and perpetuates global emergencies and tensions as it maintains the power structures as they are, because the current system cannot exist without the military power. And as we know, this system is creating increasing levels of violence and inequality, and also the destruction of the life support systems. One more reason is that we're seeing, as I mentioned before, that the emergencies that we're facing are getting a militarized response, which should never be accepted, as is the case with climate change, migrations and refugees, systemic racism, or inequality. And of course, the last but not least, we believe there are many ethical and humanitarian reasons not to bet on the military power, not to bet on war preparations for our security. So the alternatives and the reasons for us to advocate for a demilitarization are, first of all, a human security approach. We believe that if we spend money on what people need, on their most basic needs, and on their actual threats and the most feasible and most common threats to the security, as this insecurity in economic, food, health, environmental, personal, and political terms, that money will be much better spent. The alternatives are also creating a social safety net, putting money on the SDGs, on the Sustainable Development Goals, on advocating for universal public services, healthcare, education, housing, renewable energies. We believe it would improve economic and environmental cooperation as well. It should be shifted to development aid and humanitarian relief as well. And then we should make a clear bet on diplomacy, transparency, monitoring, legal arbitration, mediation, multilateral organizations, demobilization and disarmament efforts as a way to improve international relations and not to leave everything into deterrence and the threat of violence. And of course, putting money in conflict prevention and conflict transformation. We also advocate for a conversion from the military industry to the civil industry. This has happened on the other direction. We've seen many times civil industry turning into military. For example, in the Second World War, when they were called the war efforts. Well, now we advocate for peace efforts. Like we believe it's time to shift the military to civil industry. And for example, it could be redirected to to renewable energies, because these industries are not so different, and the workers are highly qualified, and they could be working perfectly in these other industries. We also advocate for non-violent alternatives, which are abundant, morally superior, and drastically less costly than appealing to military power. And we are also trying to connect the dots between the different forms of violence of this system, and that's why we're also connecting with other social movements, as the feminists, as the ecologists, and climate protesters, with anti-racist and indigenous groups, with human rights and social justice activists, because we believe we have a common diagnosis, and this could lead to alternatives that are more peaceful, sustainable, and just. And last year, we put a big emphasis on healthcare, because we saw that when the pandemic hit, our defense systems were not appropriate, and we were not capable of dealing with the threat that we were facing. And so we decided to make a comparison of what we spent on military hardware and on submarines, frigates, jets, tanks. What's the cost of these weapons, and what they could mean if we were to spend it in doctors and personnel and healthcare equipment. Also, we compare the budget that we're giving to the military and the budget that we're giving to human security oriented organizations, as it could be the World Health Organizations, the Disarmament Affairs Office, UNICEF, UNHCR, which we believe are organizations that are working for the welfare of people in a human security sense.
Kiche, sorry,
In here,
time's up.
in the bottom right.
Wind up your presentation? Already
Yes,
10 minutes
sir.
up. Yes.
All right. So I would like to encourage you to join us on GCOMS, on the Global Days of Action on Military Spending 2021. We will keep this focus on how national homeland security is not providing us a proper security, and in the times of COVID, it's been evident that this security doctrine is not working. So we will be advocating for reduction of military spending and the shifting of those resources to human security spending. And then I also want to invite you all to join us from the 15th to the 17th of October here in Barcelona. We're gonna make a World Peace Congress of the International Peace Bureau, and we would love to see you all there, and we would like it to be a space for the peace movement to gather, as is happening now there in Korea. And you can see our website there and check it out, and also here the website of the campaign and the IPB, and you can also follow us on social media. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Kiche and Ochoa. I think there's concrete two suggestions: Global Days of Action on Military Spending, 12 of April to May. It's almost 1 month the campaign, and also World Peace Congress. I think like this he also mentioned about the linkage to SDG, how we can reduce military spending, get more sufficient funding to tackle SDG and coronavirus. Already we see the interlinkage between different campaigns. Let's go to the G20. As you know, G20 countries, they are the biggest exporter and importer of all the weapons, including nuclears. so it is another angle to tackle this issue, And also they are the one manufacturers of vaccine, They control vaccine. So these are, how can you engage the G20 countries? Ricardo, now have you 10 minutes to enlighten us how to engage effectively G20 countries. Please. Mike, unmute, please. Yep.
Yes. Thank you, Anselmo, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to say that I keep in my desk this. I don't know if you can see it properly, maybe not so well. There is something that I received from you. Is written in Korean and in Spanish and in English. Peace for the world, and it is permanently on my desk. So it's.
So that meaning the for world peace. That's the world peace in Korean, right? For world peace.
Yes, and it's a nice nice gift I keep with me from PyeongChang. So my role is to share with you presentation of what is doing civil society in respect, in relation, sometimes a bit confrontation with the C20. So I tried to share my screen. Just a second. Oh, I'm not able to share the screen. I don't know why. Oh, I have a difficulty in this moment. I don't know why. Because I'm not able to share the screen. I can't see the, oh yeah.
Take time. It's the early morning, your time.
Are you able to see my screen in this moment?
Not yet.
Not yet. So something is not working. Well, anyway, we don't have a lot of time. I'm very sorry for that. Let's go directly to my speech. I don't know why I'm not able to.
Okay, you can speak.
Share
We'll try
it.
to put up ourselves from here.
Exactly. But anyway, it is even not important. If you are not able to see, I hope to be enough, clear enough. Sorry, but yeah, there is something happening in my laptop. I hope you are still able to hear to me. Very sorry for that. So first, what are the link? What are we doing? So G20 is the group of theoretically 20 countries. In fact, there are 19 countries plus the European Union, but then Spain is permanently invited. So they are in fact 19 plus 1 plus the European Union, meeting every year to deal with a lot of issues. It is a group that starting in the 90s, speaking about economic policies coordination. Then after the 2008 crisis, they started meeting as a head of state and of government. And from that year, they continue in meeting with this format that is during the year, a lot of dialogue is developed among different thematic working groups. Then there are several ministerial meetings with the ministries, and then around the end of the year, there is the head of state summit. Civil society always talk to the C20, calling them and saying that G20 is not a legitimate space, that G20 is not the world government, the world government is United Nations, a little bit in the same line we've heard by Gagea, if I pronounce exactly the name of the first friend speaking. And but anyway, recognize that within the G20 process, we have a strong decision-making, a strong preparation of decision-making. So it is meaningful to have a dialogue with them, trying to influence that process and to, in fact, positively some some orientation and decision. So civil society since the beginning met and organized itself to talk with the G20, and now it is several years that the G20 recognizes some so-called engagement groups. Engagement groups are Civil 20, Women 20, Labor 20, Think Tank 20, even Business 20. that are called easily C20, T20, L20, W20, etc. And you can imagine that these are organized space for this kind of dialogue. When Business 20 meets, normally gathers just organization of private sector actors from the member of the G20, while Civil 20 gathers organization of civil society from all over the world, precisely to strengthen this message that we have to work within the multilateral frameworks, and we are asking G20 to use its power, its financial power, to strengthen multilateral frameworks instead of creating alternative G20 initiatives that can be in competition with the multilateral approach and organized just as a flagship for the hosting country that is hosting the presidency. This year and last year have been two relevant years, of course, because of the outbreak of the pandemic. The pandemic exacerbates the inequalities and the crisis already affecting the world. And we think that we need a strong solidarity in responding to this crisis. And speaking about peace, I think that the pandemic can, on one hand, facilitate the creation, the growing of solidarity. And this is happening in several opportunities, but it is also a possibility to increase nationalism. When we heard America first, or we see that someone is putting its economic power to be the first to receive vaccine or to buy a mask, we are seeing something that is really worrying. There's nothing to do with solidarity and peace building. So we already, when I say we, I mean all the organization working within the C20 last year, but we will do it even more this year. We will continue in asking, in calling for solidarity. For instance, the first call is this call on the TRIPS waiver on all the prevention treatment, not only vaccines, because vaccines are relevant, but there are a lot of other products and goods that are needed in this moment to treat the pandemic. And C20 is a process that, similarly to the G20, is hosted by the is chaired by the hosting country. As Anselmo was saying, the hosting country this year is Italy. So Italian civil society organized together to host and facilitate the process. We had the so-called kickoff meeting 10 days ago, and Anselmo was there. And we shared some priorities for this year work. First, finance. G20 has a fundamental responsibility, given its size in financial terms, to act not to obstacle, but to facilitate the widening of fiscal spaces for all the country, and particularly for countries in the global south. And in that perspective, debt cancellation is fundamental. You've heard that last year the G20 launched the initiative to suspend the debt service. suspension is not enough. We do need cancellation. Then health, of course, and I don't repeat what has been already said. Think in particular that we need public effort to strengthen public health system, to consider vaccine as global public goods, etc. Third line of priority, climate and planet. This year we will have the COP26, and this will give, that is co-hosted by Italy and UK. So this is another opportunity to make the member of the G20 going together or converging together in the UN framework given by the Paris Agreement. Fourth, the framework of human rights, but particularly the Agenda 2030, and a way to see at the agenda not only in terms of implementation at home in the members of the G20, and not only in terms of how much the G20 helps the world in implementing the agenda with technical assistance or ODA, but more deeply in seeing how the G20 is influencing the possibility to implement the Agenda 2030, shaping in the way G20 is shaping its trade and investment pattern. And so the idea is to see at the implementation of the agenda and the role played by rich countries in a comprehensive way. To do that, and this is the fifth priority, we need a strong education towards global citizenship, and we identify also three sort of cross-cutting drivers that are the issue of digitalization, the issue of anti-corruption, that is an important topic for the G20 and for the C20 work historically, and of course, last but not least, all the issue related to gender and women and empowerment. So we created G20 works and C20 works mainly through working groups. We will have 8 working groups: finance, health, climate, global citizenship, digitalization, and anti-corruption, and gender and women. The priorities I have mentioned. The work of the C20 is organized, producing mid-year, around mid-year, a policy pack with contribution from all the different working groups. We, in the meantime, participate. We are invited, Civil 20 is invited to participate to the official working groups of the G20, where C20 can have a say, can speak, not in all sessions, but there are spaces reserved to this kind of participation of the engagement groups. And at the end of the year, before the G20 Summit, C20 organized a C20 Summit that is normally a quite complex series of event panels, discussion on the different topics. Of course, C20 releases a statement when there is a need. The first statement we will propose to the steering committee is a statement on trip waivers, because there is a very important discussion at the WTO in this period on the TRIPS implementation, with a proposal of India and South Africa for not use the TRIPS agreement on prevention treatments and vaccines. And
okay, Ricardo,
yeah,
time's up. So can you please wind up?
Yeah, I'm ending here. What I can say is that we invite everybody to be part of this process, and in order to strengthen the link we have. I mean, C20, it's not a sort of a part of an organization. C20 is fed in its working group by the participation of international civil society. If you will look at our website, that is civil20.org, it's easy to find it Googling. You will see that the registration to the working group is open, so the invitation is to be there, and that will help in feeding, I repeat, this dialogue with the capital of work and of ideas that civil society is developing in all the other rooms and spaces that civil society is occupying. Over to you, Anselmo.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. I think we'll put up your PowerPoint later in our website. As we
Okay, thank
explained, compared to previous C20, as you may know, the first civil society meeting on G20 was held 2010 in South Korea. That time, I was the chair of the civil society meeting as a GCAP member. I still remember, that means almost 10 years ago. So last 10 years, civil society has been engaging this with the G20. But particularly this year, compared to the past, I think there are two, he presented 8 working groups. 2 are rather new. One is 2030 agenda, So now we are trying to, because there are many issues which are all under SDGs. So we want to kind of bring them under one umbrella, SDG, linked to SDG. The other one is global citizenship education. I think these are the 2 added value of this working group. And so now, to make sure, Ricardo, this C20 is open to all CSO, regardless of G20, whatever, right? It's open to all, right? I think I want to make sure,
Absolutely.
As you know, G20 is only G20, so-called most economically powerful countries. But C20 is open to all, right? So because any decision made by G20 affect every country, particularly least developed countries. So C20 from the beginning was open to any country. So anybody can join the C20 activities. Okay, so
exactly. If the message is to strengthen multilateral perspective and UN, we work and talk together, and we as civil society means civil society from all over the world. So C20 has no boundaries.
Yes, right. Thank you for confirming once again. Because, and also this year we want to bring the G20 to SDG, which means SDG is a global agenda by UN. So more cooperation between the G20 and SDG, UN, particularly in terms of collective accountability of G20 countries and SDG.
Yes.
So this year is Italy. Next year, G20 will go to Indonesia. And then 2023, India. And then 2024, as far as I know, the South Africa, right? So these are the future plans. So I think we need to build not only Italy this year, but also Indonesia, India, and South Africa. Okay, thank you for your very useful information. This G20 is another platform for our engagement. Let's go to the next one. Next one is now civil society. To engage all these international organizations, we need the civic space, for freedom of association assembly. So now I would like to invite Mariana to present to us where we are now, How is the civil situation globally from Civicus? Mariana, you have a 10 minutes presentation. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you see my screen now? Thank you, Anselmo, so much, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Mariana Belalba. I work as a civic space cluster lead at Civicus. Civicus is a global alliance of civil society organizations, which main mission is to strengthen citizen action. Basically, I'm going to present the Civicus Monitor. The Civicus Monitor is a tool that Civicus created with civil society organization 4 years ago with the aim to track civic space developments in real time. And by civic space, as Anselmo mentioned a few seconds ago, we mean the rights to express, to peaceful assembly, and to associate, so the operativity of human rights defenders. I'm going to present today our latest report, which is called People Power Under Attack. Basically, every year we analyze all the data that we feed into the monitor for over a year now, and kind of tell us what is the situation, the global situation of civil space, but also what are the main tactics that governments are using to kind of limit civil space, and also a regional breakdown of which are the countries who has been improved or also which one has deteriorated. Before I go to that, but I don't have actually time to explain the methodology of the monitoring, how we gather the data and all the others. You can just see all that in our website. But I do think it's important because it's the core of my presentation, that we create a rating system. Basically, we have 5 categories going from open, narrow, obstructed, repressed, and closed. And basically, the name self-explains, but basically tells you the health of civil space in a particular country, or how well, if a country is open or not, if a country is closed or repressed, a government upheld civil space freedoms, whether or not people are able to exercise these freedoms. In a closed country, for example, it will be almost impossible to exercise these freedoms. In an open country, there is certain liberties to be able to gather, to protest without major consequences or limitations. This is basically where we are. So this is a snapshot of what is the state of civil freedoms in the world. Basically, we can see that the majority of people, basically, if you go from closed to repressed and obstructed, where there are significant restrictions to civil space, so 87% of the world population live in countries where there are significant restrictions on civil space. So every time people go to the street to protest, every time they try to express a view, they face severe limitations to this right. This is actually a problem, it has been a problem for many years, but this is an increase of 4% from last year. So year after year, we actually see that the civil space situation continues to deteriorate, and only less than 3% or 3.4% of the population live in countries where there is a healthy civil space. And if we go by region, and these are the countries, before I break down in the region, who actually have deteriorated civil space, as you can see, are the majority. 11 countries last year deteriorated civil space, so they moved from a category to a lower one, and only 2 actually have their civil space improved. And as you can see, that is an improvement very limited, because they go from closed, so completely restricted civil space, to repressed. Even though it's a very welcome improvement, you can see that people still face significant restrictions to their rights. If I go by region, we have the Americas, a region where I come from. We can see that 4 countries have actually been downgraded. Very worrisome that Costa Rica has been downgraded. Costa Rica was an open country. We have been seeing how indigenous defenders has been attacked, even killed, and there is an increased criminalization of human rights defenders, and also an attack on labor rights and unions, with a new legislation that basically kind of restricts the right of labor or workers to strike. We have seen Chile, Ecuador, and the US, who come from narrow to obstructed civil space. And the commonality of these 3 countries is the systematic repression of protests. We have seen in Chile for many years, but especially last year, when they were aiming to hold a referendum to change the constitution, how security forces continue to repress, security forces that come from the era of Pinochet, because the legislation has never been changed in terms of the use of law, the use of force, in protest. We also saw in Ecuador, we saw an improvement after Correa and Lenin took power a few years ago. There was an opening on expression, but then when people took to the street to protest, we also saw a systematic use of excessive force. In the US, not just last year, over the past 4 years, we have seen a steady deterioration of civic space. We have seen a criminalization of the journalists, stigmatization of journalists by public figures, but also the militarization of the streets, meaning that every time people, especially the Black Lives Matter movement, took to the street, they were met with excessive force. In Africa, we also see a continued deterioration. We have 4 countries who go from obstructed to repressed. And just to say that Africa, the commonality of these countries is that they're all facing elections, or they're going to go to elections. And the commonality is that most of the presidents just want to either change the constitution to continue to run for a second or third term, or are trying to hold into power. And when the opposition and activists go to the street to demand fair elections, they are met with excessive and, in some cases, lethal force. We also see some limited but very welcome upgrades with South Sudan after the social movement goes from to repress, and also the Democratic Republic of Congo, which change of president have bring some hope and openings of civil space. In the Asia Pacific, we also see, you can also see from the colors of the map, more or less the situation in the region, 3 more orange and red, so there are severe limitations. In the Pacific, it's a little bit more open, but also adding 1 country to the list to the repressed, which is the Philippines. We have seen a really worrisome deterioration of civil space. It goes from obstructed to repressed. We have an increased criminalization of human rights defenders and stigmatization of journalists, and a closing of media. Europe and Central Asia, we will think that Europe does host the country with most open or narrow category, but we also see they're going downwards. So more countries are joining the narrow category in Europe, and 1 more joins the list, Slovenia, who goes from open to narrow, which a change of government, a far-right government whose rhetoric against immigration and trying to control the media, kind of following the steps of Hungary and Poland. And finally, the Middle East and North Africa, as you can see, is basically impossible to exercise freedoms in the Middle East. And 1 more country, Iraq, joins the list, goes from repressed to close, with a brutal crackdown on protests that they experienced last year. These
Mariana,
are also the...
Can you wind them in 2 minutes? Just mention about 10 without explanation. So within 2 minutes, please.
Yes, I only have 2 slides less. Yeah, these are just the top violations of civil freedoms. As you can see, the detention of protests is the number 1 violation. It is a little bit interesting to see that, because this is framed on the COVID-19 pandemic, meaning people continue to take to the street, but also that the government kind of took advantage of the COVID pandemic to kind of crack down on the right to protest. And finally, and just to end, I think all of the presenters have touched base. I think Kike also with the call for action and the peace movement, just to reiterate that we have documented that despite these restrictions, civil society continues to be successful, but especially protest movement continue to be at the front line of change. And we can see in many instances what taking to the street and demanding for change have actually led to positive development. One of them is Chile, for example. Despite the brutal crackdown, they were able to force the government to host a referendum and change the constitution. And yeah, that will be all from me. And thank you so much. Over to you, Anselmo.
Thank you, Mariana, for very graphic presentation. So now challenge is how to use this report for effective advocacy with the government and UN agencies and other international organizations. I think this is that's why Linda invited Civicus. They produce fantastic reports, and many CSO participate in this endeavor. So now it's for us to make use of this one to advocate for common civic space. before we go into the specific issues. So thank you once again, Mariana, for your excellent the product and also presentation. Let's move to the next one. Now, another concrete action, the Action for Sustainable Development, relatively new global umbrella. Oli, good morning. It must be early morning in London, right? Okay, you have also 10 minutes, Oli. Please present your own organization and also your campaign, please.
Thank you so much, Anselmo, and it's wonderful to be with so many familiar colleagues. I've been enjoying hearing the presentation so far. Yes, it's early morning here, and greetings to you in the afternoon in Korea. So Action for Sustainable Development, it exists, or it came into existence soon after the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the 2030 Agenda were agreed in 2015. And really it's emerged from earlier joint campaigning, which was called Action 2015, which I think some of you may have been involved with. I have some slides to share as well, which will just give you an idea of some of the key campaigns that have been happening over the years since 2015, and some of the main kind of issues and areas that we are keen to work together. And I think they overlap with some of what you've already heard so far today. So I'll just find the slides here. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Yes. So the Sustainable Development Goals, I think many of you will be familiar, the 17 goals focused around key areas around people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. So quite a clear overlap between some of the key points that we've been hearing so far around the importance of civic space, the importance of economic and social equality, but also the link with climate and the importance of environmental and climate change moves to improve the situation globally. We, as Action for Sustainable Development, have been mobilizing since that time in 2015 to support particularly national coalitions to keep up the accountability on the 2030 Agenda. We feel that so far progress has been far too slow. We understand that different countries have highlighted some of the key challenges. And every year we actually work with coalitions that are working alongside the governments when they come to what's called the High-Level Political Forum, which happens in July each year, to identify and analyze the national situation. And we have developed our own reporting template, which we call the People's Scorecard. And Selmo, you've been very active on that as well. And we certainly look forward to continuing to roll that out this year, now that 5 years have passed in the implementation of the SDGs, and we need to understand where the gaps are in progress. And so, for example, Goal 1, which is around reducing poverty, or Goal 10 on inequalities, we're actually seeing many countries where inequalities are growing. Even in European countries like Spain or the UK, where actually inequalities have been going up in the last few years. And I think the overlap with the healthcare concerns that have been raised by Gadgea is very clear, where actually those who have the resources are getting preferential treatment when it comes to health, when it comes to education. And so there's a clear need to keep up the pressure and to work together as civil society to push for that more just and sustainable world, and to make sure that all voices are being heard, so that we live up to the original aspirations of the 2030 Agenda and the principle of leaving no one behind. I particularly find it inspiring at the moment, the phrase that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and that we absolutely must prioritize those who are furthest behind to ensure that the entire world can move forward together. So I'm just going to run you through some of the key campaign moments that we've had in the past, and then I'll show you where we are now. So through the various the years over the last 5 years since 2015, we had a series of moments generally linked to the 25th of September, which is the day that the goals were signed at the UN General Assembly. And so each year we've had a mobilization around that time, generally working with GCAP and also with the SDG Action Campaign of the UN. So in 2017, approximately 1,000 actions in 116 countries. And then that grew through 2018. We then saw more than 1 million people involved using this common hashtag Act for SDGs. But we felt that that hashtag was not sufficiently clear. It's quite a technical hashtag and it doesn't necessarily inspire more grassroots action. So for 2019, we moved to a different hashtag, Stand Together Now, which highlights the solidarity movement and the importance to connect between different kinds of organizations, particularly with youth and local organizing. So those connecting also to keep pressure up, not just on national governments, but also on mayor's offices, state governments, so that the local aspect of this mobilization could really take shape. And we saw many more people engaging then in 2019. And then last year, in spite of the pandemic, actually the number of people engaging, particularly online, continued to grow. Some 42 million people, we estimate, were able to use this hashtag. So we came up with an even more energizing hashtag around Turn It Around, which is linking the response to COVID with the underlying need for a systemic change. And so this must be the turning point that we have been calling for a number of years, and let us make sure that the recovery from COVID that some people were calling Build Back Better would actually go much further and would ensure that a different model is built, that we have this moment of a great reset, as some people have called it, or a transition to the low carbon economy, the importance of highlighting a different model, a different economic model as we recover. And so that language of turning it around, the turning point, was picked up by many key decision makers. We heard Guterres, the Secretary General, using that phrase, and also many decision makers recognizing that this is a moment for major change. We also had quite strong engagement through the SDG Action Zone, which happened entirely online. And some of you, I think, on this call might be interested in being involved in that again in September. It's a space for sharing key ideas with civil society and with other partners around the world, and it then streams on YouTube. But we also saw a number of mainstream media outlets also picking up this need for change. So now, where do we go from here? How do we build on this? We're just thinking ahead for this year. It truly has become a super year. People were saying that last year would be the key year, but as we know, many of the decisions that would have happened last year were actually postponed until this year. So those decisions around the COVID response, but also the biodiversity targets, which were supposed to be negotiated last year, will be negotiated this year. The COP on climate change is also postponed, will be happening in Glasgow later this year. So there are a number of overlapping decision-making forums coming up, and we feel that this year is even more critical to get things right. And so, again, we are pushing for a number of key themes, which I think will hopefully weave together with many of those that we've heard about so far. So first of all, fighting inequalities, and this does link very much with the COVID response, but also the underlying need for fairer financing, fairer taxation, the approach that actually ensures that those countries with the highest levels of debt are able to have debt, not just moratoriums, but actually cancellation of debt to ensure that they can then afford to pay for appropriate healthcare and social protection, highlighting that there's a direct overlap there. And we're seeing already a number of countries in Africa defaulting just in the last few weeks. And so a very significant need. And I think the G20, as we just heard from Ricardo, has a key role to play in that, in spite of the fact that they may not have their own kind of multilateral legal framework. They pull a lot of the strings, I think people have highlighted, behind the scenes of how the IMF and the IMF and the World Bank decisions are made. And so ensuring that those institutions do actually take this seriously in this coming year is crucial. But also then defending the defenders. And here Civicus have been very involved, and it's great to see Mariana, and we've heard a lot from Mandeep as well over recent weeks around how do we keep up that pressure and highlight that if we are serious about a different world, we need to hear those voices of the people who are fighting for climate change or fighting for human rights, fighting for democratic legitimacy and the right to speak out in whichever country they are. And I think this is also a very close overlap with many of the networks that we work with. And then the climate environmental crisis, I've already talked a little bit about this year. With the COP, we're going to see very significant mobilizing, and we've partnered with 350 Climate Action Network, and also we hear regularly from some of the youth activists behind Fridays for Future, and it's quite inspiring to see what they have been able to do. But again, making sure that those voices are brought into some of the UN processes, making sure that they can be heard so that they can shape the next steps for what happens. But then finally, we have an additional area which we're calling Fund the Front Line. And this is a little bit different from previous years. And that's really to reflect the importance of ensuring that there is adequate funding so that those who are directly affected and are the change makers, if you like, in different communities are able to actually survive and are able to continue to play that role. And we're actually launching a new approach, which we call ZOVU, which will try to tell those stories of frontline organizations and identify ways to bring funding more directly to them so that it doesn't just rely on the big global moments, but actually this is a year-round effort to really support grassroots voices.
Okay,
so
time's up. Yes, please.
This is my final slide. Yes, just a recap in terms of some of the drumbeat moments people have called it this year. We have the G7 also happening in June in the UK, and we know that the US will be quite active there. We have the Week of Action linked to the General Assembly in September. We then have the G20 in Italy, the main heads of state meeting at the end of October, and then the COP also in the UK in November. So a number of key moments, and we know that many of the civil society organizations, the big charities like Save the Children, Christian Aid, Action Aid in the UK will also be mobilizing. So there's a real chance here to build that broad coalition in a way that we haven't seen since 2015. And we really look forward to working with all of you and maybe finally delivering, as you see there, the phrase from the World Social Forum, that this might be the time to build that other world that people have been demanding for the last 20 years. So thank you so much, and look forward to future collaboration in the coming months.
Okay, thank you, Oli. Very ambitious but very important agenda for action, common action. Maybe we can add one more, as introduced by the Ochoa, the Global Days of Action. So we have 5 major mobilization. So April, May, June, G7, G20, and the UN General Assembly and Climate Summit. Okay, so now you all. During your presentation, you mentioned about role of UN, multilateralism, global governance, so what to do. So now we have 2 concluding presentations. There is another level of engagement, how to reform UN, how to make more people-oriented UN, and also making use of 75th anniversary. Now we have 2 speakers. Yasmina from Coalition for UN We Need. You have 10 minutes, and followed by Ashwara by UN Foundation. Please, 10 minutes.
Great. Thanks so much, Anselmo. So as you said, my name is Yasmina Gorshan, and I'm here today representing the Coalition for the UN We Need. You may have previously known us by our old name, the UN 2020 campaign. So since its inception in 2017, the UN 2020 campaign is focused mainly on the realization of a UN 75 anniversary outcome that not only commemorates the organization's achievements, but also takes stock of present challenges and leads to much needed strengthening of the organization overall. So as the 75th anniversary of the UN drew to a close at the end of last year, our campaign undertook a holistic reassessment of our purpose and goals and initiated an ongoing restructuring process to support future civil society action beyond just the year 2020 in support of both the UN 75 political declaration, which was adopted by member states last September, as well as the UN 75 People's Declaration and Plan for Global Action, which was adopted by the UN 2020 campaign last May. The political declaration that was adopted by states last September includes 12 commitment areas for action by member states and the UN system. It also calls on the Secretary General to report back before the end of the 75th session of the General Assembly with, quote, recommendations to advance our common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. So this report is expected to lay out the existential challenges confronting humanity, together with a set of key recommendations to resuscitate multilateralism as the world begins to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. In a number of recent speeches, the SG has signaled the need for a new global deal and a more networked and inclusive multilateralism. As part of preparations for this report, the Executive Office of the Secretary General is leading a multi-pronged consultative exercise with member states and other key stakeholders, of course, including civil society. So last December, the C4UN, the Coalition for the UN We Need, as we're now known, has adopted a 3-year strategic plan based upon the expectation that the recommendations to be made by the SG in his mandated report will also include a call for a dedicated intergovernmental process to strengthen and reform the legal and institutional machinery of the UN system. So we as a coalition are now in this transition phase in which we're implementing the provisions of our strategic plan, which includes, of course, the rebranding of the campaign, as well as the reorganization of our management structure to make sure that it's democratic, inclusive, and representative of global civil society as we make this transition from UN 2020 to the Coalition for the UN that we need. So, as we all well know, peaceful and inclusive societies are quite key for sustainable development, including by providing access to justice for all and building effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. Peace is, of course, more than just an end to war and violence. It's the promotion of economies, actions, behaviors, and laws consistent with a culture of peace. So in order to enable the future that we want, to prevent war, to sustain peace, facilitate sustainable development, end poverty, and protect universal human rights, those who are in positions of responsibility must take a transformational approach to global governance. The political declaration that states adopted last September seeks to advance our common agenda in order to renew the world's social contract and revive core values to address these challenges that we face collectively today. The 12 commitments in the declaration are wide-reaching, from taking climate action, ensuring peaceful societies, ensuring gender equality to youth engagement, among others. Now looking ahead, the C4UN intends to convene global as well as regional dialogues, briefings, events, in order to facilitate an exchange of ideas and proposals relevant to these 12 commitments. With these activities, we're really aiming to inform the SG's follow-up report on UN 75, which will of course be a key agenda item during the General Assembly this September. Later this year, we're also going to be hosting our second annual People's Forum. And last year, our participation in this PyeongChang Peace Forum contributed to preparations for our own People's Forum. And we're hoping, of course, that outcomes from this meeting will also inform the planning of our forum this year. Last year, we adopted the People's Declaration, and at this year's forum, we're really hoping, again, to be forward-looking, reflecting on the outcomes of the SG's report and some related follow-up. We're also engaged in planning other types of meetings as well, some broader events that will be bringing together civil society and more thematically focused events, which also will include involving relevant stakeholder communities, as well as a number of smaller focus sessions, including a wider variety of actors. We'll also be co-hosting, co-sponsoring, and participating in events linked to important UN calendar activities throughout the year. Another initiative that we have happening this year, one that I'm personally quite excited for, is our multilateral innovation hubs. So the idea behind these hubs is that they'll provide a space for collaboration to advance progressive proposals that seek to strengthen the UN system. They'll serve as a platform for facilitating, generating, and promoting thought leadership, and further facilitate partnerships and collaborations for advancing new and emerging reform proposals for the UN and other international institutions. And just to give a few examples of some potential focus areas, these would include perhaps discussions on a comprehensive pact for the environment, strengthening the office of the President of the General Assembly, reinforcing commitments to the 2030 Agenda, including through strengthening the HLPF, as well as working with partners to support the call to establish a civil society champion, which would be a dedicated office within the Secretariat of the UN that would monitor and advocate for improvements to modalities related to CSO participation in the broader UN sphere. So these are just a few of the activities that we have in the pipeline for 2021. The Coalition for the UN We Need serves primarily as a catalyst and convening partner, helping to advance civil society initiatives that will strengthen international cooperation. Now, as we await the SG's report, this is a time for creative thinking about how the UN can, as the saying goes, build back better as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Secretary General has repeatedly called for more networked and inclusive multilateralism. We believe civil society partnerships will be essential to achieving that objective. So I'll leave it at that, and thanks very much, Anselmo.
Okay, thank you very much for your very clear presentation about your plan and what you're going to do. Okay, let's move quickly to Aisha Machani from UN Foundation. She's going to give us a more elaborated information and insight about what we are going to do together. Yes, Aisha, you have about hopefully less than 10 minutes. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name's Aishwarya Machani, and I'm speaking on behalf of an integrated team working on our common agenda, which Yasmina kind of already touched upon, is the report that the Secretary General will be preparing for the opening of the 76th session of the General Assembly in September. So I'll give you a bit of background on the project before outlining our plans to specifically engage with youth-led civil society organisations. So even before the COVID-19 crisis, the provision of critical global public goods had become more complex and challenging. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown these problems into sharper relief. It has threatened not only our health and health systems, but also the global economy, social protection, human rights, stability, and the sustainable development prospects of billions of people. It has shown us the way in which inequality damages everyone in society, not just those left behind. And it's in this context that the need to build back better, as Yasmina said, after COVID-19, the broad outlines of the Our Common Agenda project began to come into view. So Our Common Agenda is an ambitious and forward-looking process that has been launched by the Secretary General to deliver on the requests of the member states outlined in the declaration to mark the 75th anniversary of the UN. So again, the declaration outlined 12 commitments to increase international cooperation and action. It recognised the need for reinvigorated multilateralism in the international community, and it requested the Secretary General to report back within a year with recommendations to advance our common agenda and to respond to current and future challenges. So our common agenda seeks to set itself apart from previous Secretary General reports by engaging with people who've not previously had a chance to contribute. This is a multi-track process that seeks to have input from not just thought leaders and member states, but also civil society organisations and, crucially, young people. One of the Secretary General's signature ideas, outlined in his address to the opening of the general debate of the 75th session of the General Assembly, was his call for solidarity with young people and future generations. And the 11th of the 12 commitments in the UN 75 Declaration is also to listen to and work with youth. So at the heart of the Common Agenda initiative is a mission to provide young people with a platform to genuinely have a say in our shared future. We are committed to providing a space for not just the next generation, but also future generations, such as the 10.5 billion people to be born in the next century. In designing a process to gather input from young people, we had 3 guiding principles. The first, this had to be more than just a tokenistic opportunity for young people to engage with the UN. A clear message that came out of the UN 75 Youth Town Hall discussions hosted by the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth was that young people are tired of only being given opportunities to speak at their own events, in the absence of policymakers or as an afterthought. The second principle, this process had to be aware of and collaborative with the brilliant work that so many organisations are already doing to empower young people. So keeping this in mind, we have been committed to working with key organisations from the outset. We have a core group of partners emerging around the track, including the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, Restless Development and the Youth Collective, BRAC, GALA, and the African Union Youth Envoy. Though this is by no means a closed group, and our doors are open to any youth-led organisations or youth-oriented organisations who want to have an input. And the third principle is that this could not be just another consultation. It is clear that there's a certain consultation fatigue amongst young people. There have been countless attempts to ask young people what they think are the biggest problems facing next and future generations. But there have been fewer efforts to engage with young people at the policy-making stage, which is a mistake. Young people can offer creative solutions, and crucially, it is our future that is at stake. So young people must be empowered as change makers in their own right. Guided by these principles, we've come up with a 4-step process to engage with young people. We're beginning with a core group of young thinkers and activists and steadily expanding the circle to engage with youth-led organisations from across the world. The recommendations that come out of this track will both feed into the Secretary General's broader report and culminate in a standalone youth report on our future agenda due to be delivered in June. So first, we brought together a diverse group of 8 next generation fellows, including myself. The group was nominated by leading global organisations in the field of youth empowerment. We're from 6 different regions and vary from age 18 to 30. Right now, we're putting together a challenge paper, which will outline our emerging recommendations and identify priority areas for research in the upcoming months. We've already identified 5 key themes for research, so education and skills, jobs and economic opportunities, active citizenship and participation, sustainable futures, and the voice of young people. Next, from the 13th to the 27th of February, so very soon, the UN Foundation will be hosting a big brainstorm. This is an invitation for young people from youth-led or youth-oriented organisations to share their experiences. We're asking for people to form action groups to research topics in which they have an interest, engage in open space discussions with other young people, and then present their ideas. And creative and actionable proposals will be picked up by the group of Next Generation Fellows to be included in a draft youth report. After this, in May, we're looking to have an assembly of next and future generations, which will be an opportunity for a representative group of the global youth population to come together and review the draft youth report. The event will be run in the model of a citizens' assembly and will be an opportunity to shape and confirm ideas for the final youth report. Finally, both alongside this process and afterwards, the Next Generation Fellows will engage with key policymakers to endorse the outcomes of the track. After all, this cannot be just another consultation. Going into this process, we have 2 main ambitions. First, our process has been designed by young people for young people, and we hope that this provides a model for international and national policymakers on how to engage with young people in the future. We should be given a seat at the decision-making table. Secondly, in a year that's been so disrupted and in a world that is increasingly fragmented, we see this as an opportunity to practice and promote the kind of network multilateralism that the Secretary General has talked about. Going forward, we hope that this process creates momentum for a more unified agenda for next and future generations. So the takeaways. First, we have a few spots left for our big brainstorm from the 13th to the 27th of February. So I'd like to invite all young thinkers and activists who have a clear and ambitious idea of what they want from the future to register. Also, if you know of anyone under the age of 35 who would be interested, please do pass on the details of the event to them. The recommendations that come out of the brainstorm will be included in a standalone news report and also feed into the Secretary General's broader report. So this is a chance to really shape the way in which the multilateral system engages with young people. And second, please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to collaborate in any way over the next year. Our cohort of Next Generation Fellows is always looking for new ways to engage with youth-led organisations and experts, and would be more than happy to participate in any upcoming events. So thank you all for listening, and we look forward to hopefully working with you on this new common agenda for the future.
Thank you very much, Aishi Machani. I think it's very useful, very concise, very practical. So now we see different agenda which are all interconnected, how to create a synergy among different initiatives. This is our challenge. But unfortunately, I need to apologize again. We don't have enough time to have a taking question and interactive dialogue. But I want to suggest, I will send you by email the collection of the questions. Basically, the common question I want to pose was, how to create a synergy among different initiatives. I guess while listening to others, you have a lot of new ideas, how to develop your strategy more organic way. So, but let's do it later on by email. But we have to do one more thing. Initially, we were supposed to have a welcome remark by Vice President of COICA, but somehow that was omitted in the program. So now I want to introduce, now welcome, supposed to be welcome, but it can be concluding, the remarks by the COICA. Can you please show the remark by Vice President of COICA? After that, I'll make a closing remark and then the end of this session.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests. I'm Suki Baek, Vice President of COICA. I would like to extend my gratitude to everyone who have made it here today, despite the unprecedented difficulties presented by the COVID-19 crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic is not only a health crisis, but also has huge economic and social consequences. Therefore, the pandemic exacerbated the vulnerabilities and inequalities within and between countries. Furthermore, the pandemic has the potential to severely undermine decades of development, accomplishment, and SDG implementations. Therefore, it is important to reimagine how global partners will collaborate and make solidarity possible. As you already know, the year 2020 marked the 75th anniversary of the foundation of the United Nations. Despite the long journey taken by the UN during the past 75 years, there is still much to be done in the face of new challenges. Especially the current COVID-19 pandemic threatens to disrupt the spirit of multilateralism embodied by the UN and other international organizations. Therefore, we can say that the current crisis of COVID-19 has been a wake-up call for renewed and revitalized multilateralism and a strengthened position of the UN. To mark the 75th anniversary of the UN, the world is calling for a joint effort by the government, civil society, and international organizations to resolve the pandemic and long-term challenges such as climate changes, global inequality, conflicts, and security of human rights. In line with the global voices to highlight the importance of global solidarity and collaboration, President Jae In-moon of the Republic of Korea participated in the high-level meeting to mark the UN's 75th anniversary and stressed the importance of solidarity and multilateral cooperation as a power unique to humans that a virus could never match. Ladies and gentlemen, we should remind ourselves that this issue cannot be resolved by any country alone. In order to resolve the current issues, multilateral cooperation is crucial. And the main key to this is that civil society is actively engaged in this process. In the sense of the renewal of multilateralism and global governance, we should increase the opportunity to improve the role and capacity of the global stakeholders. This year, 2021, is the 30th anniversary of the founding of COICA. To mark this anniversary, COICA will continue its efforts to explore ways to work much better to restore trust between people and their governments, as well as to reinforce global solidarity with the civil societies and other partner organizations. I would like to wish all of you a productive day, and I hope that today's session will help to explore the pathway to enhance multilateralism and global solidarity through active involvement of civil societies. And finally, with this highlight, I would like to conclude my speech. Multilateralism that we are dreaming of in our future should be well-connected, inclusive, resilient, and effective. Once again, I would like to thank all of you who have participated in today's session for taking time out of your busy schedules. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think her welcome remark was exactly a summary of what we have discussed, as if she has listened to all our presentations. Wow. So thank you very much for the remark. And also, I hope COICA will join us in some of the agenda. So we are trying to do this year so that we can build really partnership with the COICA, as we are doing with the PyeongChang Peace Forum. I would like to suggest take a joint action while we are discussing here about the many global issues. Something is happening in Myanmar these days. As you know, the last week there was a military coup. Many people, especially young people, they are taking to the street, peaceful disobedience, peaceful assembly, expressing their desire for democracy and peace and human rights. So I would like to suggest we take a symbolic action. 3 fingers. Everybody now, the Myanmar, they take 3 fingers. This is a symbol against dictatorship, like a movie, Hunger Game, Can you show your 3 fingers? We can take a group photo, so we can send result of our meeting together with this gesture. Okay? Can you join 3 fingers all together? Let's put 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you very much for your participation. Let's keep in touch. Hope to see you next year in PyeongChang. Okay? Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.